Are you trying to transition into tech in 2024? Are you maybe going a self-taught route or just getting out of boot camp and not really sure what technology you should learn to actually get a job and to also keep your job? Well, this video is for you. I'm actually a self-taught developer. I actually was a real estate agent for 3 years, went the self-taught route. In 9 to 10 months, I actually transitioned into tech. I've had 2 jobs in the first year. The first one I just left because I got a better opportunity. It didn't get fired. So after having 2 jobs in tech, still loving it and growing, I figured I'd be a good resource to kind of share what technologies you could actually expect to use on the workforce, and just kind of get some clarification to some technological categories that you may or may not have heard of. So the first one I want to talk about is version control. I'm sure you guys have heard of Git before in GitHub, but you might not really know what they're meant for. Git, there's a big difference that a lot of new developers don't understand, and they kind of throw them together. Git is a version control system. GitHub is for code hosting. So these are 2 different things that work together very well, but they're 2 separate things. Git is a software that allows you to track the history of your code base, see what changes have been made, who made the changes, allow you to go back. Let's say you made a mistake and you want to go back to a previous state of your code. Maybe you did something a week ago, you want to go back to that. That's what Git is for. And you can have that on your computer. What is great about Git is also you can have different branches of your code so that you can work on different features with different copies of your code. That is what Git is for. That's kind of like a dumbed down version, but that is what Git is for. And there's different software out there, but 90% of the time in your workforce, you're going to hear Git. GitHub is a code hosting. What that means is while Git is awesome to see histories of your code and you can go back and everything, if your computer breaks, all your code is gone. So code hosting allows you to host your code in the cloud or on the internet through their hosting platform. You can access it on their website and you can pull it down to local machines. So that way, if you break your computer, you still have a copy of your code base somewhere stored and you can always access it. You can just get on a computer and pull down your code and continue working. There's this concept of remote repositories, which is like on GitHub, and then you have your local repository on your computer. So that's why they work hand in hand together, because GitHub can track the version history as well with Git. So they work hand in hand, but they're 2 separate things. You can use them separately. You can go on GitHub and see other people's code, and you can pull it down, sometimes use some of other people's software, versus in Git, you can do that on your machine without pushing anything up to GitHub. But again, they work very well together. And the whole point of knowing these technologies is really good for when you work at a company. It's not gonna just be you, it's gonna be 5, 10, 100 people working, 1,000 people working on the same code base. And you guys don't wanna step on any toes. So you wanna make sure you're branching off of the main code base so you can work on different features at the same time. Your boss is gonna be approving your code before it merges into the main branch. And I'm gonna actually do a video, the next video, the one after, on Git. Like, I don't wanna call it like a course, whatever you wanna call those things. I actually did a little lesson for a project I was helping with for my free time, and I just kind of did it on the Notes app, and I never really made a video, and I feel like it'd be kind of helpful for his channel, so I'll actually be coming out with that soon. But Git, you definitely learn that. GitHub, if you want to be kind of trendy, you could do GitLab or Bitbucket, and there's other ones, but GitHub, I would start with that. That's probably the most popular one. The next thing I'm talking about is programming languages. You hear people say it all the time. You already know what programming language is, so I'm not going to deep dive into what they are. But what I really want to talk about is all these channels always talk about, you got to learn JavaScript, you got to learn Python, and it's because they're taking an approach of generalization. What is the easiest? What is the most used? And while that's a good way, I guess, to choose, I think if you're trying to get a job, it's not the best way. It shouldn't matter whether it's hard or not. It shouldn't matter how many people use it. To a degree, what you should want to learn is, what do you want to do in tech? There's web developers, there's backend developers, there's mobile developers, there's AI. There's all these different little subfields, and that will really help you narrow down what your first 1 or 2 languages you should learn. So if you're trying to be a mobile developer, you can learn Swift for iOS, Kotlin for Android. You can learn, you can do JavaScript and TypeScript too as well, and use like something like React Native. You can, if you're going to be a web developer, definitely learn JavaScript. If you're going to do back end, there's so many different languages that you can use. So then you can look into what are some of your dream companies? What languages are they using? I used to want to work for a company called Shipt, which is like Instacart pretty much, but I think a lot better because they also built like the Radio Shack, or not Radio Shack, Target and places like that, and get like video games and stuff for you. And I used to really want to work for them, and they used Go. They use Python. So that kind of motivated me to learn certain languages. So maybe make a list of jobs that you would want to work for, and that will also help you. So yeah, it's the next thing that I wanted to go over. That was kind of like a quick tangent, because I'm just kind of tired of everybody telling everybody to learn the same 2 languages, and it kind of varies. But anyway, the next thing I want to talk about is documentation. You don't hear about this too much. It's not that really fancy. Is when you go to work at an actual company, documentation will be very important. You need documentation for your development team. You need documentation for other people that are going to mess with your code daily. Documentation for people that, again, in your company might use your tool, but they're not going to look at the nitty gritty of how you built it. They just want to know how to use it. Documentation. If you are having a client-based type of product, they're going to use it. You might create documentation for how they use it. So documentation is very important. The most common ones are going to be through a README file or a Markdown file, and you'll just see README in all caps. And you might see one at the root of the project, and you might see one through every folder. But it's pretty much a way of using I don't know if you consider it a language, but pretty much it's a simple syntax to learn to manipulate text to make like these nice looking pages. Some people actually make websites with Markdown files, but it's a good way of like you can do the numbers, the pound sign, and that would make it like a header instead of doing like a H1 tag in HTML. You can use the slash and then over, I think, and it will make it like a bullet point. You can do 2 dashes on one side and 2 dashes on the other side, and it should make it, I believe, italic or bold. So it's like a really simple syntax to make really good looking documentation. You can use the backticks to do like code snippets. So it's a really good, simple way. You don't have to be a pro at it. Nobody knows all of it, but you're probably going to do some documentation. So learn a little Markdown is good. You're going to do comments, which are like you write lines. Like almost, I don't want to call it code, but you write lines in your code that are kind of like ignored by the compilers, and they're just kind of like quick notes of what this code is doing. But you need to learn what is a good commit, because it can kind of clutter up the space if you have so many comments in your code, kind of necessary. And if you write good code, it should explain itself. So sometimes a good comment is not necessarily what it's doing, but why you did it, because maybe it's doing it different than other places. So that's a whole nother skill of just understanding when to comment, why, how to do it. And then if you're using TypeScript, you have types. So there's all these different ways of doing documentation, and just kind of looking into that is really good, because you're probably going to do it. This video is getting long, so I'm gonna try to go through the next ones. The next one is CI/CD, or continuous integration and continuous deployment. This is a concept I definitely didn't care about when I started learning, and it's this idea of automating a lot of things. Besides just writing code, you actually want to make sure that you're testing it. You want to make sure that your environments are good. You want to make sure that you're getting your code to your live site. So when you're doing your personal projects, you're probably just pushing everything to main. But eventually, when you get to these companies, they have multiple environments. Like they have a development environment, and then they have a staging environment, a production environment. And you kind of want to automate getting this code to different stages out there, and eventually into production, so your customers can use it. So while you can do this manually, it's kind of nice to automate that. Also, you might test, but you don't want to manually have to run a test. So maybe you want to test every time somebody pushes some code up, or every time something happens, something changes. And this is kind of what the CI/CD thing is these ideas, these pipelines, these things that automatically happen based off of events and at certain times. And an easy way to learn them is GitHub Actions. I highly suggest everybody learn to do that, because I think they're kind of a simple way to kind of get into them. They can get very complicated sometimes, but I think they're a good way of learning and getting an understanding of this continuous integration conversation. The next thing I want to talk about, I got my little cheat sheet right here, is a framework. So it's cool to learn JavaScript, Python. 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to use a framework too, which is kind of like somebody put a team, a group of people put together all this reusable functionality to make certain things that a lot of people do easier. For example, if you're trying to make a web server, you can do that with just like nodes, like built-in packages. They make it easier when you use something like Express to make a server. A lot easier to read, they abstract a lot of stuff away, and you're 9 times out of 10 going to use something like that. So again, what framework you use will depend on what programming language you use and what type of work you're trying to do. If you're doing web development and you're using JavaScript, TypeScript, you're going to hear Express. You're going to hear, if you're trying to do server-side rendering, you're going to hear Next.js. If you're trying to do front-end development, you'll probably hear some React or Angular. So there's different things you'll hear, and that will kind of dictate what you should learn as well. But I think you shouldn't get fixated on what's the latest and greatest. Again, figure out what you're trying to do, figure out which most companies keep saying on their LinkedIn or something, and just try to learn one for a month or two, get the basics of it to go hand in hand with your with the programming language you're learning. The next one, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but not really, is testing. Nobody ever talks about it. I did the Odin project, and it was like a brief moment on it, but it wasn't really deep at all. And this idea of testing your code, we're so used to writing code when we're just trying to learn a language that we don't really value testing it, because it may not work the way we expect it to. And even if we try to write code that makes sense, we still want to validate that it's going to work in certain situations. And there's different types of testing, and testing is a whole skill. My current job really pushes this, and I think I've grown a lot into it, but I'm learning each and every day. And there's different types. There's unit tests, there's integration tests, there's an end test, there's regression tests, there's performance tests. There's all these different types of tests, and some you may or may not do. As a new developer, you're more than likely to see unit testing and integration tests probably a lot. And just briefly, unit testing is the idea of breaking all your code into as small as possible pieces and testing those functions. Usually it's functions, maybe classes. You're testing those individual pieces separately and just making sure that those little portions do what they're supposed to do. And the idea is if you get a lot of coverage over everything, you can have some confidence in your code base that it works as you expect, as well as catch bugs at an earlier state before they all start working together. All those functions start working together. Integration test is when you kind of start combining things and combining more than one functionality together and see how they work together. And the end testing is this idea of trying to kind of like anticipate the flow of something that a user will actually do with your site or your application and trying to test that whole flow. So maybe there's a registration flow and we want to test the whole thing, simulate what real data will look like going through our system, and does it work the way we expect it to. So there's all these different types of testing, and you should I would say start with unit testing and trying to start practicing doing that on your personal projects. The next thing I want to talk about, and I think this is the last one, is cloud services. And this cloud concept, if you're not techie, you're like, what is that? Cloud is pretty much this idea. Again, this is probably like, if you're really into tech, you're probably going to hate this description. But the cloud is this concept of accessing software and technological services via the internet. The powerful thing about this is these companies offer these services to you. That's how they make their money, so that you don't have to build them and manage them yourself. For example, instead of you having an actual server, like a bunch of computers and trying to set up a database and all this stuff, and all these computers in your bedroom, you ever see like those old movies and they have all these computers stacked up? You have to manage that. That's a skill in itself to manage these computers. Instead of that, what you can do is outsource that to somebody like Amazon or Google, one of these big companies that they can afford to do that. They have the team to do that. And all you have to worry about is just setting it up or paying them and configuring the systems that they've already built and that they manage. For example, another thing would be like your database. You want to host that somewhere else. So all you have to do is, again, sign up, configure the system, decide what type of system you want to use, and they handle all the actual material, infrastructure, and management of it. And you just kind of configure as you go what you need. So again, that's probably a horrible explanation, but your company's definitely gonna be using AWS or GCP, which is Google Cloud Platform, I think it is, Azure, I think is how you say it. And there's other like companies that kind of simplify it where they use those services behind the scenes, like Render, Fly.io. There was other ones that I've used before, but yeah, you should just, again, you may or may not be touching that as a junior dev, but you should understand that because it's going to come up. I guarantee you're going to hear about S3 from Amazon, which is like file storage pretty much, and like log storage, and pretty much any it's pretty much object storage. Yeah, you're going to see that a lot. So just get an understanding and learn a little bit of what the cloud is and how you may or may not have to interact with it, I think is very valuable. So guys, that's the end of my video. I hope these tips helped you guys out. Again, this was just to give you a better feel of what you can expect to get a job and keep your job. I really just want you guys to be equipped to really make sure you're learning the right things and getting the best advice that's applicable to your situation. I plan on doing more videos like this that are kind of chill, not really scripted or anything, but my personal advice based on my personal experience. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Everybody's got to ask when they're doing YouTube. But yeah, I appreciate you guys watching the video, and I wish you guys best of luck on your job hunting journey.